I've got a pretty solid, comfy morning routine. Get myself a big mug of coffee, completely ignore my girlfriend,
What the fuck?
and instead go hunting for Twitter brain rot. And oh boy, have I dug up some of the premium stuff this time. A few days back, I came across this cancerous claptrap. Racism in America was almost dead. Then the Obamas showed up and set it back 100 years. Now, I've seen many right-wing people express this position. From their point of view, by around the 1990s, the race question was basically solved. The American Civil War had been won by the good guys. Slavery was ended at the expense of many lives, both white and black. Civil rights laws had been successfully passed. The overt racism of the 1950s and 60s had become extremely unpopular both politically and culturally. The work done to put the final nail in the coffin of racism by cultural icons like Bill Cosby, Will Smith, Michael Jordan was ultimately undone by Obama and other racial activists. This idea that the racial upheaval experienced in the 2020s was actually caused by Obama destroying all the progress America had made is so prevalent on the right that mainstream talking heads now repeat it as if it were just true without any evidence. For example, here's what Megyn Kelly had to say on the topic. And I apologize in advance for subjecting you to Megyn fucking Kelly, but be warned, there's gonna be a lot of stupid stuff in this video.
We don't feel like ourselves. We haven't felt like ourselves in a while. And I'm sorry to get political, but I'm just going to be honest. We haven't felt like ourselves since Barack Obama. I just think he was such a slick snake. You know, he was this affable guy who was like wearing good suits and looked the part and sounded the part and dressed the part, but was so divisive in his messaging. The left, they look at you like when you say this, they don't know what you're talking about. It's like, because you don't pay attention to the other half of the country. You only pay attention to your absurd news sources, which spin and spin and spin to protect Democrats, especially if they're named Obama. He's the one who started to inject race where no one had been doing it. He's the one who started to use his pen and the phone to shove things down our throat that we didn't want. He's the one who shoved through an entitlement on our health care and our personal doctor visits that he promised he wouldn't mess with, and then he did, really hurting people, causing massive anger and open lies. He never missed an opportunity to twist the knife on the racial issue. He would do it subtly and in his own way, but it was very clear what he was doing. For the first time, we had a president who weighed in on legal cases before they'd played out. We never did that. That was a taboo that had never been crossed before him. And Donald Trump was the reason Barack Obama, reverse that. Barack Obama was the reason Donald Trump came about, that he was born as a political figure. They say Trump's divisive. He was the antidote. He was the answer to the divisiveness of Barack Obama. And we just haven't felt like ourselves for years now.
In my experience, Megyn Kelly's position is a pretty widespread one held on the American right wing, that America was finally getting past all of its racial problems, but that evil Obama brought race back into the conversation. He poisoned modern political discourse with racial hatred. Well, we don't have to take anyone's word for it. We can go back for ourselves and examine what Obama has said and done. Was he actually a divisive president? Let's answer that question once and for all. First things first, let's lay out exactly what people mean by Obama's divisiveness. That Megyn Kelly clip was a good starting point. So, here's a quick list of her claims. 1. The media selectively reports on stories to protect Democrats, especially Obama. 2. Obama injected race where no one had done it before. 3. Obamacare really hurt people. 4. Obama twisted the knife on the racial issue. This sounds a lot like 2, frankly. 5. Obama weighed in on legal cases before they played out, rather than remaining impartial, which broke a taboo. 6. Donald Trump's divisiveness is the antidote to Obama's divisiveness. Now, I want to examine all of these claims, but we really should start with the last one, the idea that Trump's divisiveness is the antidote to, or is somehow in response to, Obama's divisiveness. This is a core component of the MAGA worldview, that anytime Trump or his associates or his administration violates the law or infringes on somebody's liberties, it's okay because the Democrats did it first. Now, there's 2 problems with this position. 1, the narrative that Democrat bad actions justify Trump's bad actions relies on Trump supporters making out Democrat actions to be worse than they actually are. And 2, they're still fucking bad actions, dude. Megyn Kelly herself should know this. Before she transformed into a Mar-a-Lago cocksleeve, she was actually the target of Trump's divisiveness. And back then, she still had enough of a spine to stand up to him over it.
You may have heard that there was a dust-up involving yours truly and presidential contender Donald Trump. You've called women you don't like fat pigs, dogs, slobs, and disgusting animals. Your Twitter account?
Only Rosie O'Donnell.
The fact is, she asked me a very inappropriate question. She should really be apologizing to me. You want to know the truth?
You could see there was blood coming out of her eyes, blood coming out of her wherever. I said, how much of this do you take? I have zero respect for Megyn Kelly. I don't think she's very good at what she does. I think she's highly overrated.
Trump, who is the front runner, will not apologize. And I certainly will not apologize for doing good journalism.
Firing off a series of negative late-night tweets about Fox News anchor and Republican debate co-moderator Megyn Kelly, retweeting a comment calling her a bimbo. On Tuesday, Fox News chairman Roger Ailes demanding an apology from Trump.
It's a very small element in my life, Megyn Kelly. I don't care about Megyn Kelly, but no, I would not apologize. She should probably apologize to me, but I just don't care.
But Fox News has had enough, pulling the interview after Trump ridiculed its political coverage and its anchor Megyn Kelly yet again, calling Kelly a lightweight on Twitter Tuesday.
Bizarre, because I became the story. He was so very focused on me that I became the story, and you never want to be the story when you're a news person. You want to be covering the story. So it was truly like an Alice through the looking glass experience. If Trump is a sexual predator, then it's a big story.
You are fascinated with sex and you don't care about public policy.
Me?
Now, that's
Really?
what I get out of watching you tonight.
You know what, Mr. Speaker, I'm not fascinated by sex, but I am fascinated by the protection of women and understanding what we're getting in the Oval Office.
Jesus Christ, what the hell happened to Megyn Kelly's self-respect? Maybe she got grabbed by the pussy. The point is, the way that Megyn Kelly was treated by Trump was far worse than the way Obama treated basically anyone. And Trump's treatment of Megyn Kelly is only the tip of the iceberg. Every day, Trump says something new that is absolutely unhinged about anyone he opposes. Obama.
Whether it's right or wrong, it's time to go after people. Obama's been caught directly. So people say, a group. It's not a group. It's Obama. His orders are on the paper. The leader of the gang was President Obama, Barack Hussein Obama. Have you heard of him? Look, he's guilty. It's not a question. I like to say, let's give it time. It's there. He's guilty. This was treason. This was every word you can think of.
Biden.
And when I say Biden, it's not Biden. It was the lunatics that work around in the Oval Office, around the beautiful Resolute desk. It's not Biden, because I don't think Biden knew what was happening. I think that the Autopen is one of the biggest scandals in the history of this country.
Nancy Pelosi.
That crazy, horrible human being, Nancy Pelosi, who cheats like hell. She sold. You know what she said last night? They say, well, we'll get ready to start impeaching him. Now, how bad are people like that? They're just trouble for our country. They're bad, sick people.
Hillary Clinton.
They all said lock her up, and I felt, and I could have done it, but I felt it would have been a terrible thing. And then this happened to me. And so I may feel differently about it. I can't tell you, I'm not sure I can answer the question. Hillary Clinton, I didn't say lock her up.
Lock her up is right.
I didn't say lock her up.
For what she's done, they should lock her up.
I didn't say lock her up.
Crooked, you should lock her up.
I didn't say lock her up.
Lock up Hillary.
Anyone who opposes him, really.
She was always of Indian heritage, and she was only promoting Indian heritage. I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black.
Now listen, even if you believe this nonsense, even if you actually do think that Obama was born in Kenya, and he tried to rig the 2016 election, and he directed the deep state to obstruct Trump's first term, even if you think Nancy Pelosi did a bunch of insider trading, and prevented security from protecting the Capitol building on January 6th from the vicious Fedsurrection rioters planted there by Biden, who were also simultaneously innocent grandmas just walking through, even if you think that Joe Biden was ridiculously corrupt, and took billions of dollars from China or Ukraine or wherever, and he wasn't actually running the government, it was all the Autopen. Even if you genuinely believe every single false schizo conspiracy theory that Trump pumps out there on a daily basis, these things are inherently divisive. Maybe you think that's justified divisiveness because the Democrats are actually corrupt and the Republicans should divide themselves away from them. Okay, but if you think that, then there's not actually much room for you to be blaming Obama for his own apparent divisiveness. After all, you want to be divided from him anyway, right? Like, just so you understand what's going on here, Megyn Kelly's claim that Trump's divisiveness is the antidote to Obama's divisiveness is wrong. Even if we assume that Obama actually was divisive, all that Trump's divisiveness does is exacerbate the problem. It drives the country even further apart. And if that's what you want, then own it. Don't cry when the Democrats do it too. Cry-bullying and gaslighting has become a staple feature of Republican rhetoric at this point.
Wow.
Of course, underneath all of this is the real question. Was Obama actually divisive? Well, let's examine those other 5 claims. Did the media actually selectively report on stories to protect Obama and other Democrats? Honestly, the answer to this is yes. I recall how it was back in the late 2000s and early 2010s. Obama mania was a real phenomenon. People absolutely loved the guy. I recall this one 2008 Politico piece describing how Obama had an almost cult-like following. I also remember this incredible 2010 magazine cover. If this were any other president, Newsweek would be accused of being too partisan. But perhaps the most direct description of what this era was like comes from this CBC article, "The Media's in Love with Barack Obama. Sometimes need an outsider in order to really notice what's going on." The article points out that Obama's self-depreciating joke over drone striking people overseas had the mainstream media laughing and fawning all over him, with the exception of Fox News, of course. But then the article correctly points out that if it was George Bush making the same joke, those same outlets would be blasting him, not laughing along with him. Why the double standard? Well, it's because journalists did actually just like Obama, a lot, enough to ignore some of his bad spots. Now, this wasn't all the journalists, obviously, and they certainly grew to be more critical of him during his second term. But I'm willing to give Megyn Kelly a pass on her first point. The mainstream media, again with the exception of Fox, was actually willing to whitewash Obama's image. But what about the rest of these points? Well, let's look at the Obamacare claim. I've seen many people say their healthcare prices were driven up by Obamacare. And it is true that healthcare prices have risen since Obamacare's implementation, but there's no consensus on whether that's due to Obamacare specifically or just rising prices in general. What Obamacare did do is force insurance to include coverage for pre-existing conditions, which is a big benefit. It didn't stop the rising cost of healthcare. It didn't include a public option. There's a lot of stuff it just failed at, mainly due to Republican opposition. But covering healthcare is still wildly popular among Americans, which is why Republican congressmen just broke ranks to support the Democratic attempt in bringing back those healthcare subsidies from the shutdown fight a few months ago. So, while there are real criticisms of Obamacare, I think Megyn Kelly's claim here is way too strong. To be nice, I'll give her a half point. That leaves us with Obama injecting race, Obama twisting the knife in the racial issue, and Obama weighing in on legal cases before they played out. And you know what? There's actually a pretty solid through line between these 3 points, but to describe it, we'll have to shift gears a little bit. A few months ago, Ben Shapiro was on Ezra Klein's podcast, where he laid out his view of what Obama did to American politics. And although Shapiro is far less extreme than Kelly, he basically offers the same analysis. He's just more well-spoken. If you want to watch this whole thing, links in the description, but I'll just go over the relevant parts here. And I want you to take note of how Shapiro's framing his argument.
In 2008, Barack Obama runs as unifying candidate. Like him or hate him, I didn't vote for him, I was not a fan. The Barack Obama ran as somebody who was, in his very personage, unifying America. There was no red America, there was no blue America, there was just the United States, there was no black or white America, there were just Americans. And the idea was that he was sort of the apotheosis of the coming together. He was going to be the culmination of a lot of these strands of American history coming together to put to bed so many of the problems that had sort of plagued America over the course of our tumultuous history.
Now, this is pretty accurate in some respects. For example, in the speech that initially put Obama on the map, the 2004 Democratic Convention keynote, he used a lot of uniting language.
For alongside our famous individualism, there's another ingredient in the American saga, a belief that we're all connected as one people. If there's a child on the south side of Chicago who can't read, that matters to me even if it's not my child. If there's a senior citizen somewhere who can't pay for their prescription drugs and having to choose between medicine and the rent, that makes my life poorer even if it's not my grandparent. If there's an Arab American family being rounded up without benefit of an attorney or due process, that threatens my civil liberties. It is that fundamental belief. It is that fundamental belief. I am my brother's keeper. I am my sister's keeper that makes this country work. It's what allows us to pursue our individual dreams and yet still come together as one American family.
Same with how Obama framed his candidacy during his 2008 presidential victory speech.
In this country, we rise or fall as one nation, as one people. Let's resist the temptation to fall back on the same partisanship and pettiness and immaturity that has poisoned our politics for so long. Let's remember that it was a man from this state who first carried the banner of the Republican Party to the White House, a party founded on the values of self-reliance and individual liberty and national unity. Those are values that we all share, And while the Democratic Party has won a great victory tonight, we do so with a measure of humility and determination to heal the divides that have held back our progress.
So yeah, it does sound like Shapiro's correct. Obama did present himself to the electorate as this uniting figure, and there's a reason for that. When George Bush launched his campaign for presidency in 1999, he gave an interview where he said famously, "I'm a uniter, not a divider." This was in the context of Bush, as the governor of Texas, winning re-election with 69% of the vote, 49% of the Hispanic vote, and widespread Democratic endorsement as well. In response to that, Bush said, "I'm a uniter. I refuse to play the politics of putting people into groups, and pitting one group against another." Now, as president, Bush was pretty much the polar opposite of a uniter, considering just how incredibly polarizing the Iraq War was. Time magazine wrote in 2003, "If Ronald Reagan was the great communicator, Bush is proving to be the great polarizer." It's unclear when the term "the Great Unifier" began to be used to refer to Obama, but it was certainly sometime after the 2004 speech. An article written in UofC Berkeley's campus newspaper in early 2008 pointed out Obama's unifier persona multiple times. An NBC article from 1 week before the election positively nicknamed him the Great Unifier. And a roll call article written 1 day after the election, titled "Obama Needs Help in Keeping Promise to Unify Country," said, "After George Bush's record as the Great Polarizer, President Obama definitely should seek to be the Great Unifier." Also, holy shit, early internet articles are pretty broken nowadays, aren't they? So, alright, I feel comfortable saying that Ben Shapiro was correct. The idea of Obama as a unifying figure came about in part due to Obama's own actions, and in part due to his followers placing that label on him. But here's the next stage in Shapiro's retelling of this story.
He runs, he wins, Obamacare happens, there's a big blowback in the form of the Tea Party, and he reacts to that by essentially polarizing the electorate. He decides that instead of kind of broadcasting to the general electorate a sort of optimistic message about America, that he is going to narrowcast his election in 2012. He's going to base it on a much more identity groups rooted politics. He's going to appeal to Black Americans as Black Americans and gay Americans as gay Americans and Latino Americans as Latino Americans. And there are a lot of articles coming out at this time about essentially demographics is destiny, and there's going to be a new minority-majority coalition in the United States.
Now, Ben Shapiro is correct that the Democrats did push that cringe demographics are destiny shit, and ultimately blew up in their faces. Latinos are very socially conservative. They're natural Republican voters, and all the Democrats did was throw gas in the fire of the great replacement shit with this rhetoric. I covered that topic a few years ago, but it was utterly retarded of 2016-era left-wingers to run around screaming that Democrats are going to have a permanent supermajority due to the browning of America, and then expect the right wing to just roll over and take it, and not, attempt increasingly more drastic measures to oppose it. But more importantly is this idea of Shapiro's that by 2012, Obama had shed his unifier persona and become significantly more divisive, latching on to identity politics. He doesn't outright say it, but the label of Great Unifier became co-opted by the right during this time, and transformed from praise to derision. And in order to explain how that happened, we're gonna have to go down a rabbit hole, so buckle up. This is Rush Limbaugh. If somehow you don't know who he is, well, I wish I could have your life, but he's probably the most well-known right-wing radio show host turned podcaster, or he died in 2021. I know everyone nowadays thinks of Alex Jones, but I'm pretty sure that Rush in his prime had him beat. His broadcasts were all about covering the news of the day from a partisan right perspective, and he did not take it very well at all when Obama won the presidency in 2008. If you were paying attention to the news around that time, you would have noticed the flood of articles claiming that Rush Limbaugh was failing to come together to patriotically support the new president after the election was over. No, Limbaugh famously stated he wanted Obama to fail as president, even though that would necessarily mean America gets worse. Now, I wanted to find the origin of this quote myself. It's easy enough to find it in print articles of the time, but it's always in a different context. Sometimes Limbaugh's talking to Sean Hannity, sometimes he's giving a speech, sometimes he's on a podcast, and I wanted the origin of the idea. So I decided to go listening to some old Rush Limbaugh episodes, which, not gonna lie, was quite the detour in the creation of this video. Just so you know where I'm coming from, I hadn't actually heard any of Rush Limbaugh's podcasts before this. I didn't watch him back in the day or anything. And as I began to watch the broadcast between the 2008 presidential election and Obama's inauguration in 2009, I pretty quickly discovered two things about this guy. One, he's pretty funny sometimes. It's no wonder that he was able to build up such a following. And two, he's wrong about almost everything he's ever said, oftentimes in really stupid ways, which is pretty funny too. But to remain on topic, I noticed that there was this thesis flowing through the episodes that I watched, which he always seemed to gravitate back to, no matter what the topic of the day was. And it had two parts. One, the Democrats were basically huffing their own farts about the historic importance of Obama's win. He often did this by making facetious observations about how, now that Obama's been elected, the sun is shining brighter, nature is on Obama's side, or the inauguration will be like a religious event.
As you know, in America today, the sun seems to be shining a little brighter. The birds are chirping happier melodies out there. I heard it driving in. The smell of spring has displaced old man winter. In fact, there's not going to be any winter. It will not come this year. Harsh winds will not chill the souls of man, nor will harsh winds chill the souls of women. There won't be any harsh winds. There will not be any winter. There will be nothing but love and devotion and... Just handed a note here. President Dmitry Medvedev orders missiles deployed in Europe as world hails Obama. No big deal. Not a... Oh, just been handed another note. Palestinians launch rocket attack into Israel as world hails Obama. That's just no big deal. That's just the world being what it is. No problem. There will be no winter. There will be no wars. There will be no harsh winds. The shackles of the past, which for so long have bound too many of us, have been shaken loose.
And 2, John McCain, Obama's opponent in 2008, was not a true conservative, that the Republican Party itself was not truly conservative, and that part of being a true conservative means obstructing Obama as a principle.
Conservatism did not lose last night. Conservatism was not on the ballot. The Republican Party has not sought to be conservative since the new tone was initiated by the Bush administration in 2001. The process of rebuilding the conservative movement has begun. And the conservative movement, I guess it does need to be rebuilt in a sense, but it should be a lot easier than a lot of people think, because a lot of so-called conservatives abandoned the movement in support of Obama and identity politics of their own and so forth. And the idea, they got what they wanted. They got the candidate they wanted. They got the result that we all knew was going to happen when they got the candidate they wanted. And then when things started going south, a lot of these pseudo-conservatives, you know what, I kind of like Obama. Obama can talk, Obama can speak, so let them stay on that side of the aisle.
By the way, just so you know what kind of spin doctoring is happening here, Limbaugh is about to quote both McCain and Obama's post-election speeches, and I want you to notice how he deliberately misquotes them to justify his narrative that the Republicans have abandoned conservatism and that the Democrats have broken the rules first, therefore the right is justified breaking them in retaliation, even though in actuality, neither of those things happened.
Now, for all of those of you out there, not in this audience, but the faint of heart on our side who want to go through this rigmarole game of appeasement and conciliation. Congratulations, worked nice. McCain last night, the reason I asked you if he got booed last night was because I was booing. When he came out and said, ladies and gentlemen, my friends, I want us to come together tonight in unity with Senator and President-elect Obama. I do not want unity with President-elect Obama.
Senator Obama and I have had and argued our differences, and he has prevailed. No doubt many of those differences remain. These are difficult times for our country, and I pledge to him tonight to do all in my power to help him lead us through the many challenges we face. I urge all Americans who supported me to join me in not just congratulating him, but offering our next president our goodwill and earnest effort to find ways to come together, to find the necessary compromises, to bridge our differences, and help restore our prosperity, defend our security in a dangerous world, and leave our children and grandchildren a stronger, better country than we inherited. Whatever our differences, we are fellow Americans. And please believe me when I say, no association has ever meant more to me than that.
By the time all this is all over, 57 million Americans will have voted no on this stuff. I, for one, do not think it wise to abandon 57 million Americans who want no part of an Obama agenda. And I, for one, will not abandon 57 million Americans who want no part of it. Unity with Obama? Can you spell defeat? We still want to cave. What's the point? I know McCain wanted to sound gracious, but what is the point now of saying unify with Obama? Does Obama say he wants to unify with us? No.
As Lincoln said to a nation far more divided than ours, we are not enemies, but friends. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. And to those Americans whose support I have yet to earn, I may not have won your vote tonight, but I hear your voices. I need your help, and I will be your president too.
He said, I know there are people out there that didn't vote for me, but I'm going to listen to you. Yes, as in the fairness doctrine, you're going to listen to us? I'm going to listen to you. Fine, you're going to listen all day long, do nothing about it, right? There's no unity with Obama. He doesn't cross the aisle.
By the way, the fairness doctrine that Limbaugh mentions there, that's an FCC rule stating that the holders of broadcast licenses had an obligation to present controversial issues of public importance on their shows, and to do so in a manner that fairly reflected differing viewpoints. The history of the fairness doctrine and its predecessors is documented in the book The Messengers of the Right, going back to before the Second World War. The doctrine was in force from 1949 to 1987, but the part of the story that's of interest to us today is that immediately after the doctrine was repealed, the Rush Limbaugh show massively blew up, going from a little-known, little-listened-to radio show out of Sacramento to a countrywide phenomenon. During the era of the fairness doctrine, people like Limbaugh, who peddled conspiracy theories, true divisiveness, and outright personal attacks, were often pulled off the air if they tried to advertise themselves as a news show. There was more leeway for this type of speech under the entertainment banner, but for journalism, the FCC's rules actually did a pretty good job at keeping things more or less impartial. The loss of the fairness doctrine is considered to be a major contributor to the rise of political polarization in the modern era. Beforehand, broadcasters were obligated to allow bad ideas to be challenged in open debate, and people like Limbaugh failed to thrive because, frankly, they're just kind of wrong and stupid a lot of the time. But the repeal of the doctrine gave Limbaugh, and others like him, a safe space where they could build an echo chamber. Limbaugh himself rarely engaged in true debate. His show featured almost exclusively long-winded monologues riddled with inaccuracies, and the few times he was challenged by a caller, he always controlled the mute button. Rush Limbaugh's entire model of partisan broadcasting would have died under the fairness doctrine, which is why he opposed it coming back throughout his entire career, and why he views unity with the Democrats as simply a way to infringe on his partisanship. Therefore, any true right-winger would want to obstruct the Democrats at any possible opportunity. To do so otherwise would mean allowing the Democrats to win. And if that meant that you were just a worse person, well, so be it.
Senator McCain, the theme, the purpose of his campaign was to go after moderates, to go after these rock-ribbed independents and so forth. McCain lost independents and moderates 60 to 39%. Did you hear that? Did you people hear that? And the Wizards of Smart on our side advocated this very strategery. Just walk across the aisle. You walk across the aisle, they break your leg. You reach across the aisle, they break your arm. If you walk and reach across the aisle, they punch you in the nose. Let's unify around the notion that the one strength that we had was Sarah Palin. It was bad. She was a drag. Yeah. Let's unify with our side on that. Let's unify with the media, and let's unify with the Democrats. Let's let them continue to set our agenda, right? So we can show that we're gracious, and we're polite, and we're understanding, and we're conciliatory, and most of all, we are good people. We're not mean like you think we are.
Anyway, that's my impression of the guy's ideas, having now consumed around 100 hours of this brain rot. And finally, I found the part I was looking for, the context surrounding Rush Limbaugh's claim that he wanted Obama to fail. This is from his broadcast 4 days before Obama's inauguration, and I'll include the whole section just so you can see I'm not cutting anything out.
I got a request here from a major American print publication. Dear Rush, for the Obama Immaculate Inauguration, we are asking a handful of very prominent politicians, statesmen, scholars, businessmen, commentators, and economists to write 400 words on their hope for the Obama presidency. We would love to include you. If you could send us 400 words on your hope for the Obama presidency, we need it by Monday night, that would be ideal. Now, see, here we're caught in this trap again. The premise is, what is your hope for the... My hope, and please understand me when I say this, I disagree fervently with the people on our side of the aisle who have caved and who say, well, I hope he succeeds. We've got to give him a chance. Why? They didn't give Bush a chance in 2000. Before he was inaugurated, the search and destroy mission had begun. I'm not talking about search and destroy, but I've been listening to Barack Obama for a year and a half. I know what his politics are. I know what his plans are, as he has stated them. I don't want them to succeed. If I wanted Obama to succeed, I'd be happy the Republicans have laid down. And I would be encouraging Republicans to lay down and support him. I don't want, look, what he's talking about is the absorption of as much of the private sector by the U.S. government as possible. From the banking business to the mortgage industry to the automobile business to the healthcare. I do not want the government in charge of all of these things. I don't want this to work. So I'm thinking of replying to the guys, okay, I'll send you a response, but I don't need 400 words. I need 4. I hope he fails. Well, what are you laughing at? See, here's the point. Everybody thinks it's outrageous to say. I mean, look at even my staff. Oh, you can't do that. Why not? Why is it any different? What's new? What is unfair about my saying I hope liberalism fails? Liberalism is our problem. Liberalism is what's gotten us dangerously close to the precipice here. Why do I want more of it? I don't care what the drive-by story is. I would be honored if the drive-by media headlined me all day long. Limbaugh : I hope Obama fails. Somebody's got to say it. But were the liberals out there hoping Bush succeeded, or were they out there trying to destroy him from before he was even inaugurated? Why do we have to play the game on their rules?
Well, Limbaugh did make headlines, that's for sure, but of course he falls back on the same faulty logic we see Trumpsters use now. The Democrats did it first, so we should do it. Except that's not true. Even back then, all you have to do is look at stuff like Al Gore's support for George Bush, despite being his political opponent, to know that what Limbaugh is saying is total BS.
Almost a century and a half ago, Senator Stephen Douglas told Abraham Lincoln, who had just defeated him for the presidency, "Partisan feeling must yield to patriotism." I'm with you, Mr. President, and God bless you. Well, in that same spirit, I say to President-elect Bush that what remains of partisan rancor must now be put aside, and may God bless his stewardship of this country. Neither he nor I anticipated this long and difficult road. Certainly neither of us wanted it to happen. Yet it came, and now it has ended, resolved as it must be resolved through the honored institutions of our democracy. Over the library of one of our great law schools is inscribed the motto, "Not under man, but under God and law." That's the ruling principle of American freedom, the source of our democratic liberties. I've tried to make it my guide throughout this contest, as it has guided America's deliberations of all the complex issues of the past 5 weeks. Now the U.S. Supreme Court has spoken. Let there be no doubt, while I strongly disagree with the court's decision, I accept it. I accept the finality of this outcome, which will be ratified next Monday in the Electoral College. And tonight, for the sake of our unity as a people and the strength of our democracy, I offer my concession. I also accept my responsibility, which I will discharge unconditionally, to honor the new president-elect and do everything possible to help him bring Americans together in fulfillment of the great vision that our Declaration of Independence defines and that our Constitution affirms and defends.
Ultimately, Limbaugh is angry here that McCain showed the same grace in defeat that Al Gore showed in 2000, or Kerry showed in 2004.
In America, it is vital that every vote count and that every vote be counted. But the outcome should be decided by voters, not a protracted legal process. I would not give up this fight if there was a chance that we would prevail. But it is now clear that even when all the provisional ballots are counted, which they will be, there won't be enough outstanding votes for us to be able to win Ohio. and therefore we cannot win this election. We are required now to work together for the good of our country. In the days ahead, we must find common cause. We must join in common effort, without remorse or recrimination, without anger or rancor. America is in need of unity and longing for a larger measure of compassion. I hope President Bush will advance those values in the coming years. I pledge to do my part to try to bridge the partisan divide. I know this is a difficult time for my supporters, but I ask them, all of you, to join me in doing that.
Or that pretty much every modern presidential candidate, whether Republican or Democrat, has showed up until Trump. People like this say they did it first in order to justify them doing it themselves. They don't view the rules as principles to be followed because they embody some kind of good virtue, because they want to hold themselves up to a good standard, however imperfectly they might do it in practice. They view the rules as restrictions, as the marker for the maximum depth they can justify sinking to and still be within the technical bounds of acceptability. The difference between Democrats and Republicans is, generally speaking, there's always outliers. Democrats ask, how should I behave? What is the right thing to do here? And can I actually do it? While Republicans ask, what can I get away with? What excuse has the other side given me that allows me to do what I want? And Rush Limbaugh is a prime example of that attitude. Anyway, as for why Rush Limbaugh came to the conclusion that Obama must be opposed at all costs, the actual answer to that question is that Obama really was meaningfully reaching across the aisle, and he was actually seeing success in doing so, which spelled doom for Limbaugh. In the Rush Limbaugh biography, Army of One, the event that triggered his I want Obama to fail attitude from that January 16th podcast is described pretty clearly. Shortly after the election, Obama met with a group of right-wing pundits in order to understand their ideas and build some bridges, which is what a unifier would do. But Limbaugh and other more hard-right voices in America viewed Obama's overtures as an attempt to subvert and defang the Republican Party, and the only option was to simply oppose him no matter what. By the time Obama was meeting with GOP leaders in the days after his inauguration, the right had broken into two camps. The center-right establishment Republicans, willing to work with Obama to get done what they both wanted done, and maybe cut some deals on edge items, and the more ideologically captured far-right, who wanted to oppose Obama at all cost. And Obama called it like he saw it. He said publicly to the GOP, you can't just listen to Rush Limbaugh if you want to get things done. And this comment massively pissed Limbaugh off. He fired back during the January 26, 2009 edition of his show.
On Friday afternoon, as you know, the President of the United States, actually it was Friday morning, but we didn't learn about it until Friday afternoon. Friday morning, in a meeting with House and Senate Republican leaders, President Obama basically told them, stop listening to me. That's not how things get done in Washington. We can't let Rush Limbaugh stall the stimulus plan. Now, this is the great unifier. This is the man who's going to unify everybody and usher in a new era of bipartisanship and love. And he's obviously more frightened of me than he is Mitch McConnell. He is more frightened of me than he is of, say, John Boehner. Which doesn't say much about our party. I mean, to tell you the truth, folks, if the president is a little more worried about somebody on the radio than he is somebody on Capitol Hill, I think Obama wants me to fail. There's no question. Obama didn't use the words, but President Obama, by telling you and elected Republicans in Washington to not listen to me because I am not how things get done in Washington, he has said that he wants me to fail.
I know this is like 17-year-old deep lore at this point, but I hope you guys can see how remarkably stupid this is. What's actually happening here is that Obama fully admitted you cannot unify with someone who does not want to unify with you. It can't be a one-sided affair. And then Limbaugh used this admission of his as an excuse to pretend that Obama is the divider, that Obama wants him to fail, when he outright said he wanted Obama to fail. It's all smokescreens and hypocrisy from the right. But nonetheless, this is the origin of the Great Unifier being used to mock Obama rather than praise him. Rush Limbaugh repeated the phrase enough that it became normalized as a common angle of attack on the right. By 2010, other mainstream Republicans, like the minority whip Eric Cantor, were echoing Limbaugh's rhetoric. And then, of course, there is Mitch McConnell and his open desire to make Obama a one-term president.
Over the past week, some have said it was indelicate of me to suggest that our top political priority over the next 2 years should be to deny President Obama a second term. But the fact is, if our primary legislative goals are to repeal and replace the health spending bill, to end the bailouts, cut spending, and shrink the size and scope of government, the only way to do all of those things is to put someone in the White House who won't veto any of these things.
That level of obstructionism, even on things that Democrats and Republicans align on, is the complete opposite of unity. There's a book called Framed, America's 51 Constitutions and the Crisis of Governance, which is not really about this topic, it's about problems with the Constitution. Nonetheless, we can learn from it that McConnell observed Ted Kennedy, a Democrat, cooperating with the Bush administration in areas where they had common ground, granting Bush that sort of bipartisan legitimacy that helped him get reelected in 2004. The lesson McConnell took from this is that there was simply no reason for the Republicans to cooperate with Obama on anything, as they would only be assisting his 2012 election campaign. I hope you can now see the links from the past to the present. Right-wingers nowadays, from talking heads like Megyn Kelly and Ben Shapiro, all the way down to the rank and file, constantly play up how divisive Obama was, mocking the great unifier thing, when in reality, Obama legitimately attempted to bring everyone together, and it was the Republicans who refused to unify. It was the Republicans who wanted division, because they cared more about winning elections than doing what's best for the country in the moment. Speaking of Ben Shapiro, let's get back to his retelling of this era of American political history.
And Mitt Romney, who is the most milquetoast and probably, I'd say, personally clean candidate in my lifetime, he is characterized as a person who forcibly cuts the hair of gay kids and straps dogs to the top of his car, and he might put y'all back in chains, as Joe Biden said during the campaign. And Mitt Romney loses. And I think that the parties take away from that precisely the wrong messages. They take away the same message, but then they manifest it differently. The message taken away by the Democratic Party is we have an unbeatable coalition, this new coalition that Barack Obama has forged in 2012, in which he lost votes from 2008, but he still maintained a very solid majority. This is the way forward. Right? We will never lose again because we will be able to cobble together a majority-minority coalition, some college-educated white people, particularly female, and we're never going to lose again. And Republicans took away exactly the same message, which was no matter how milquetoast we run, no matter how clean the candidate, we're going to get ripped up and down, and we're going to lose. We're just demographically losing the argument. And so what Republicans came away with was, we're just going to throw whatever against the wall. The big problem here is that Mitt Romney was simply too nice a guy. We need to run the biggest pulsating middle finger that we can. That pulsating middle finger is Donald Trump.
This is totally incorrect. The Republican establishment in 2016 did not want Donald Trump. They wanted Jeb Bush. They wanted Ted Cruz. They wanted any other neocon on that huge 2015 primary stage over Donald Trump. Shapiro is rewriting history here to say that Obama's divisiveness was leading to electoral wins on the left. Therefore, the Republicans actively decided to be even more divisive, and Trump was the man for the job. But this isn't what happened. Ben is trying to do the whole blame the left to justify the right thing, and it just doesn't fly. As you've already seen, Obama was the opposite of divisive. McConnell's obstructionism was rooted in prioritizing party over country in an attempt to somehow take Obama down. Trump was the end result of normalizing this way of doing politics on the right. And you know what? Shapiro knows this. He knows the Republican establishment didn't actually want Trump, because he was right there alongside them. He knows that Trump is a cancer on American democracy. He's only willing to say it when it's safe for his career to do so. Back when everyone believed that Trump's time in politics was over, in the wake of January 6th, Shapiro had no problem calling him what he really was.
Trump tweeted out Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution, giving states a chance to certify a corrected set of facts, not the fraudulent or inaccurate ones which they were asked to previously certify. USA demands the truth. Okay, well, this is where, again, are you responsible for raising the temperature? You damn sure well are when you do that sort of stuff. I mean, what exactly does he think the remedy is at this point? He's taken it to every court in the land. All the courts have said he didn't provide the evidence. He took it to state legislatures. They said, you're not providing enough evidence for us to overturn the will of the people. Okay, like, what? The vice president isn't going to break the law. Congress isn't going to break the law. And then when he says the USA demands the truth, like, in what way? In what way? What is the practical way in which this is true? Right? How is that going to happen? What is that supposed to mean?
At one point, Ben Shapiro wasn't a coward. He was actually capable of going against Trump, but I guess those days are long over. Let's continue on.
For people who don't, kind of live on the right and imbibe from the media of the right during this time, the understanding on the right was that Barack Obama was a much more divisive figure than the left and the traditional media like to say that he was. And they saw him as a fundamental transformative change agent who did not see the American experiment in a positive light.
This is because of what I described earlier, that right-wing echo chamber, created by Rush Limbaugh getting salty as fuck over Obama winning 2008, began to transform every single fucking story into the next spin cycle. Do you remember when the rightoids were whipped into a frenzy over Obama wanting fucking Dijon mustard on his burger?
As you all know, President Obama is a real man of the people, and yesterday he dropped by a popular Virginia restaurant to grab a burger with his pal Joe. Now, the Gateway Pundit blog pointed out that plain old ketchup, well, it didn't quite cut it for the president. Now, take a look at him ordering his burger with a very special condiment.
All right, I'm going to have your basic cheddar cheeseburger, medium well. I just want mustard, no ketchup. If you got like a spicy mustard or something like that, or a Dijon mustard, something like that.
All right, Dijon mustard? I think the president watched just a little bit too much television as a kid.
Pardon me, would you have any Grey Poupon? You mean the mustard? Yes, would you have any? Would I? Or do I? Both, actually.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that fancy burger, Mr. President.
Or how about how Obama's apparently a terrorist because he did a fist bump with his wife?
A fist bump, a pound, a terrorist fist jab? The gesture everyone seems to interpret differently. We'll show you some interesting body communication and find out what it really says.
Or how about the whole tan suit thing?
You also, though, criticized the president's wardrobe, his choice of suit, of a light-colored suit. Do you think that was fair to do that?
Yeah, because it was in the context of the president coming out. The world and the country have been waiting for a week for what he's going to say about Syria, what he's going to say about ISIS. And he comes out, yes, with this new suit on, but what bothered me was he began by not even talking about Syria. He said he wanted to talk about the issue that most Americans are concerned about, and that's the fact that the economic numbers for the second quarter had been adjusted. And to me, that was an insult to the memory of Jim Foley who was killed.
Why did you take issue with the suit?
Because you know the image makers in the White House. Here's a president coming out at such a serious moment where he should be addressing the country on such a serious matter, and he looked like he was on his way to a party at the Hamptons, which would have been fine if he addressed the issue at hand. But instead, he started talking about the economy, saying that was more important than Syria. And I just thought it detracted from the seriousness of the moment. It's different, for instance, than what David Cameron, the way he addressed the British people today. To me, it did not show the seriousness of purpose that you need from a commander-in-chief at such a serious time as this.
Even when we've seen other former presidents, President Clinton, President Reagan, I believe, addressing the nation in similar attire?
At a moment like this, when the whole country is waiting to see, and the whole world is waiting to see, to me, at least he could have won whatever he wanted if he addressed the issue head on. But to come out and start talking about the economy, to me, just detracted from the seriousness of the moment, and I thought the suit was a metaphor for his lack of seriousness.
This is legitimately Obama derangement syndrome. By the way, that was actually a term from before Trump derangement syndrome. Here it is being used in 2011 to describe right-wingers who are just cooked over Obama's successes.
The Michelle Obama derangement syndrome is going strong in the right-wing media. The latest manufactured offense centers around the First Lady's decision to support an up-and-coming American jewelry designer, and what's wrong with that, by wearing a few of her bracelets to a fundraiser this week. The diamond bracelets aren't cheap. Altogether, they were valued at around, $42,000. But the First Lady didn't buy them. They were loaned to her for the evening, a detail the Fox News website conveniently left out of its article, which was posted under the headline, get this, First Lady rocks $40K in diamonds on her wrist. The Drudge Report screamed, East Wing bling, Michelle owes $42,000 diamond cuffs. And here's the right-wing Gateway Pundit blog, everyone must sacrifice. Michelle Obama wears $42,000 in bling to DNC fundraiser. This is nothing new with the right-wing media. They don't have a problem with Newt Gingrich's $500,000 line of credit at Tiffany's. Mitt Romney can quadruple the square footage of his multi-million-dollar beach house, no problem. But if Michelle Obama borrows some jewelry, the knives come out.
Oh, my bad. This one's not even about Barack Obama. It's about Michelle Obama. On some level, that's even worse. And Republican hypocrisy over Democratic elites living an upper-class lifestyle. Glad to see nothing's fucking changed in the past 15 years. In any case, if you weren't paying attention back in the day, anytime Obama did fucking anything, some right-wing talking head somewhere acted completely unhinged about it. And though a lot of these attacks came from a place of mocking liberal elitism, some of it was also just straight up racism. For example, when Obama began playing basketball at the White House, some right-wingers began to say that the sport was inappropriate for some reason. They never quite explained why, but I think there's some pretty good guesses. And to be fair, some left-wingers also thought it was inappropriate as well, but for different reasons other than race. Feminists claimed that Obama only played basketball with men, which they called sexist, even though Obama did actually play with women sometimes too. These are just stupid complaints, but they do show how Obama derangement syndrome was a real thing. And speaking of ODS, let's get back to Ben Shapiro rewriting history.
That when he was saying that all the sort of positive, sunny, optimistic vision of America, that what he actually meant was the Cairo speech, where America was sort of a sinner in the Middle East.
That Cairo speech Ben's talking about? Well, Obama gave a speech at Cairo University on June 4th, 2009, and right-wingers commonly cite this event as Obama begging the Middle East for forgiveness, admitting that America was actually the great Satan that bin Laden believed it was. All this shit. But I watched that speech, and none of it is in there. The entire thing was Obama talking about de-radicalizing Islamic extremists, as well as economic development. Watch it for yourself if you want, but there's nothing here.
That his view of American history was much more along the lines of what he said about Henry Louis Gates or Trayvon Martin than it was along the lines of there's no white America and black America, there's just Americans. And so the reaction of the right was, okay, this is an interest group-based politics that does not particularly like the founding. And we are going to react to that with Trumpism.
Okay, in Shapiro's view, rather than actually being a unifier, Obama's views on race relations were based on his comments regarding Henry Louis Gates and Trayvon Martin. Ben Shapiro repeats those two events as being important to his view that Obama was a historically divisive president, along with a third event.
For President Obama, I think the left perceives the Obamacare moment as the moment that the right sort of radicalized, and I don't think that's actually right. I think the bitter clingers comments were a big one. That was in the 2008 election.
Ah yes, the bitter clinger controversy. I actually recall seeing that one when it happened. Okay, what did Obama have to say about all of these events? Well, let's start with the Henry Louis Gates story first. Gates was a black university professor. He's still alive, he's just retired. Back in 2009, he was coming home from a trip when he found out the front door to his house was jammed shut. It was later discovered somebody tried to break into his home while he was overseas and broke the lock on the door. Gates entered his house through the back door and then managed to force the front door open from the inside. Other people in the neighborhood thought Gates was a burglar and called the cops. Officer Crowley arrived at Gates' house shortly after. Accounts of their interaction differ. Gates' version of the events was that Crowley was belligerent and racist, while Crowley's version was that Gates was belligerent and kept saying stuff like, "You're arresting me because I'm black." On the one hand, Crowley had a history of being accused of similar complaints, 8 in total, with 2 of them specifically being about anti-black racial bias. But on the other hand, Crowley's radio captured Gates being belligerent in the background. As always, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. What we do know, though, is that even though Gates provided Crowley with his ID, showing that he did in fact live there, he was still arrested. The arrest photo went viral, a neighbor managed to capture it. And here is what Obama had to say about the story, that Ben Shapiro believes is one of these extremely divisive, racially radicalizing moments in American history.
Recently, Professor Henry Louis Gates Jr. was arrested at his home in Cambridge. What does that incident say to you, and what does it say about race relations in America?
In which he suggested that the officer had acted stupidly and then sort of linked that with racial discrimination in the past.
I don't know all the facts. What's been reported, is that the guy forgot his keys, jimmied his way to get into the house. There was a report called into the police station that there might be a burglary taking place. So far, so good. They're reporting, the police are doing what they should, there's a call, they go investigate what happens. My understanding is, at that point, Professor Gates is already in his house. The police officer comes in. I'm sure there's some exchange of words, but my understanding is that Professor Gates then shows his ID to show that this is his house. And at that point, he gets arrested for disorderly conduct, charges which are later dropped. Now, I don't know, not having been there and not seeing all the facts, what role race played in that, but I think it's fair to say, number one, any of us would be pretty angry. Number two, that the Cambridge police acted stupidly in arresting somebody when there was already proof that they were in their own home. And number three, what I think we know separate and apart from this incident is that there is a long history in this country of African Americans and Latinos
being stopped by law enforcement disproportionately. And that's just a fact. As you know, Lynn, when I was in the state legislature in Illinois, we worked on a racial profiling bill because there was indisputable evidence that blacks and Hispanics were being stopped disproportionately. And that is a sign, an example of how, race remains a factor in the society. That doesn't lessen the incredible progress that has been made. I am standing here as testimony to the progress that's been made. And yet, the fact of the matter is that this still haunts us. And even when there are honest misunderstandings, the fact that blacks and Hispanics are picked up more frequently and oftentimes for no cause casts suspicion even when there is good cause.
Now, I don't know about you guys, but I don't see the division here. Obama is saying that black people and Latinos get stopped by the cops more often. Now, part of that is with good reason. High crime neighborhoods, the fact that some minorities do just commit more crime, fair enough. But part of that is also going to be racism. There are legitimate racists running around. In fact, there are more of them now than there were back in 2009. So Obama's not wrong here. And Shapiro's claim that this is a radicalizing moment for the right just falls flat. In fact, I recall Dave Chappelle having a pretty good set of jokes about this situation.
I'm not saying I don't like police. I'm not saying that. I'm saying I'm just scared of them. Nothing wrong with that. Sometimes we want to call them too. Somebody broke into my house once. It's a good time to call them, but I don't. The house is too nice. It ain't a real nice house, but they never believe I lived in it. Oh, he's still here. Open and shut case, Johnson. I saw this once before when I was a rookie. Apparently this nigger broke in and hung up pictures of his family everywhere. Well, let's sprinkle some crack on him and get out of here.
That's pretty funny, but I bring it up because the right has embraced Dave Chappelle for making edgy jokes in the modern era, as if to say like, oh man, those woke moralists have ruined everything. Thank God Dave Chappelle is still out here doing good old-fashioned 2000s era edgy comedy. And fair enough, woke moralism can be a problem. However, I refuse to believe that any true right-winger is simultaneously holding the position that Obama's milquetoast comments caused racial division, while at the same time being fans of Chappelle's edgy comedy. Because right-wingers were the butt of his jokes way more than anything Obama ever said. I can only assume the rightoids just don't remember exactly what it was like back in the day, or what it is that they're cheering for. Or they're just hypocrites and liars. That's a possibility too. But the rest of these examples that Shapiro gave are more serious. They were murder cases. So maybe there's a little bit more to these complaints. The next example on Ben Shapiro's list is the Trayvon Martin case. For you youngsters who don't know, Trayvon Martin was a 17-year-old black kid that was shot and killed by George Zimmerman, a Hispanic man, back in 2012. Zimmerman was a neighborhood watchman for the gated community they were in. Martin had walked to the corner store to buy Skittles, and Zimmerman thought he was acting suspiciously. Zimmerman called the police and said there was a string of break-ins in the area, and he was tailing a suspicious person. Dispatch told Zimmerman not to follow Martin, but he did anyway. Once again, accounts of the altercation differ. Zimmerman's testimony, along with witnesses who came out of their houses to watch the fight, do not agree on who started it, but it is agreed that there was a fight, that Martin had the upper hand, and that Zimmerman shot him. Zimmerman successfully argued self-defense in court, but his reputation had become so destroyed that he could no longer hold down a job. He ended up selling the gun he used to shoot Martin as a piece of American history, and he began auctioning off his own Confederate paintings to make ends meet. Now, I do personally recall a good chunk of the left-wing online discourse at the time revolved around white-on-black violence or white supremacy, which is kind of retarded. But Ben Shapiro's claim here is about Obama, not random internet idiots or kids on campus. So, let's see what Obama had to say that was apparently so divisive.
The Trayvon Martin situation was quite polarizing, for sure.
This is a tragedy. I can only imagine what these parents are going through. And when I think about this boy, I think about my own kids. And I think every parent in America should be able to understand why it is absolutely imperative that we investigate every aspect of this, and that everybody pulls together, federal, state, and local, to figure out exactly how this tragedy happened. So I'm glad that Not only is the Justice Department looking into it, I understand now that the governor of the state of Florida has formed a task force to investigate what's taking place. I think all of us have to do some soul searching to figure out how does something like this happen. And that means that we examine the laws and the context for what happened, as well as the specifics of the incident. But my main message is to the parents of Trayvon Martin. You know, if I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon. And, you know, I think they are right to expect that all of us as Americans are going to take this with the seriousness it deserves, and that we're going to get to the bottom of exactly what happened.
Okay, that sounded perfectly reasonable. Are you seriously going to sit here and claim that the right got radicalized by this statement? That's the division Obama sowed? But this wasn't the only thing that Obama had to say in the Trayvon Martin case. He gave a second statement after Zimmerman had received his not guilty verdict. This is going to be one of the longer clips in the video because Obama is specifically talking about the concept of context, and I don't want to be ironic and leave the context out.
Yeah, I want to make sure that, once again, I send my thoughts and prayers, as well as Michelle's, to the family of Trayvon Martin, and to remark on the incredible grace and dignity with which they've dealt with the entire situation. I can only imagine what they're going through, and it's remarkable how they've handled it. The second thing I want to say is to reiterate what I said on Sunday, which is there are going to be a lot of arguments about the legal issues in the case. I'll let all the legal analysts and talking heads address those issues. The judge conducted the trial in a professional manner. The prosecution and the defense made their arguments. The juries were properly instructed that in a case such as this, reasonable doubt was relevant, and they rendered a verdict. And once the jury's spoken, that's how our system works. But I did want to just talk a little bit about context and how people have responded to it, and how people are feeling. You know, when Trayvon Martin was first shot, I said that this could have been my son. Another way of saying that is Trayvon Martin could have been me 35 years ago. And when you think about why, in the African American community at least, there's a lot of pain around what happened here, I think it's important to recognize that the African American community is looking at this issue through a set of experiences and a history that doesn't go away. You know, there are very few African American men in this country who haven't had the experience of being followed when they were shopping in a department store. That includes me. There are very, very few African American men who haven't had the experience of walking across the street and hearing the locks click on the doors of cars. That happens to me, at least before I was a senator. There are very few African Americans who haven't had the experience of getting on an elevator and a woman clutching her purse nervously and holding her breath until she had a chance to get off. That happens often. And you know, I don't want to exaggerate this, but those sets of experiences inform how the African American community interprets what happened one night in Florida. And it's inescapable for people to bring those experiences to bear. The African American community is also knowledgeable that there is a history of racial disparities in the application of our criminal laws. Everything from the death penalty to enforcement of our drug laws. And that ends up having an impact in terms of how people interpret the case. Now, this isn't to say that the African American community is naive about the fact that African American young men are disproportionately involved in the criminal justice system, that they're disproportionately both victims and perpetrators of violence. It's not to make excuses for that fact, although black folks do interpret the reasons for that in a historical context. They understand that some of the violence that takes place in poor black neighborhoods around the country is born out of a very violent past in this country, and that the poverty and dysfunction that we see in those communities can be traced to a very difficult history. And so the fact that sometimes that's unacknowledged adds to the frustration. And the fact that a lot of African American boys are painted with a broad brush, and the excuse is given, well, there are these statistics out there that show that African American boys are more violent. Using that as an excuse to then see sons treated differently causes pain. I think the African American community is also not naive in understanding that statistically, somebody like Trayvon Martin was probably statistically more likely to be shot by a peer than he was by somebody else. So folks understand the challenges that exist for African American boys. But they get frustrated, I think, if they feel that there's no context for it, and that context is being denied.
And for all those who claim that these comments are what radicalize the right, you do know what Obama is saying here, right? He's saying that black men have an experience of being viewed as predators by other people, and when it's undeserved, it hurts. And that experience colors how the black community saw the Trayvon Martin case, where Zimmerman believed he was up to no good for no real reason. And fair enough. But Obama also said that black men are disproportionately likely to commit violence themselves, and therefore, this is a complicated topic. He is completely and totally correct on this. He also said that Trayvon could be his son, or he could be Trayvon if he were younger. I've had tons of people unironically quote this at me as the moment Obama broke the anti-racist compact of the 90s. This was when Obama divided America again and brought racism back. This is fucking delusional. Even if you don't think it's appropriate for a president to comment on a case where the jury ruled against his preferred position, okay, fine. It's kind of stupid, but fine. But this isn't divisive. If these statements are what ruined racial harmony in your mind, then there was never any hope for racial harmony in the first place. You were always going to get triggered by some fucking stupid thing. Alright, what about Ben Shapiro's third claim, the bitter clingers controversy? This one came from before Obama was president. It was a series of remarks he made in private that were recorded and leaked to the media.
It's interesting you choose those. I mean, those are mostly first rhetorical examples. It's like, take the bitter clingers comment, because I actually think about this one a lot, right? Where he gets caught on this, he's on tape.
You go to some of these small towns in Pennsylvania, a lot of small towns in the Midwest. The jobs have been gone now for 25 years and nothing's replaced them. And they've gone through the Clinton administration and the Bush administration. And each successive administration has said that somehow these communities are going to regenerate, and they have not. So it's not surprising then that they get better and they cling to guns or religion or antipathy towards people who aren't like them, or anti-immigrant sentiment, or anti-trade sentiment. And a way to explain their frustrations.
What Obama is saying here is that small-town America saw its jobs get shipped overseas, that globalization might have been a net good for society overall, but it had some negative externalities. Some groups have not benefited from it. For a lot of small-town Americans, the jobs left and never came back. As a result, the people who still live in those places became bitter at the lack of opportunity, which they feel has been taken from them by the government or the capitalists or whoever, and they end up turning to religion or constitutional issues like guns or xenophobia as a way of coping with basically having lost their entire way of life. And this is a completely correct analysis of the situation, but nonetheless, it still went viral back in the day. I remember it myself. Even though Obama is clearly just describing and analyzing the situation, the right-wing spin doctors at Fox News blasted it all across the country, saying that Obama actually looks down on you small-town white folk. He's sneering at you, calling you ignorant, clinging to your guns and God, when that is not what the context of this quote is at all. In fact, I had my own back and forth over this very thing recently. Do you recall the everyone is 12 meme that I spoke about recently on this channel? Well, one of the prime examples I didn't get into during that video was Trump reposting an AI-generated TikTok of him as a fighter pilot, flying a plane over a crowd of Democrat protesters, where he drops a load of diarrhea down onto Harry Sisson, a Democrat TikToker. This was reposted constantly, and everyone was laughing like crazy over it. Not gonna lie, including me sometimes. I guess I'm also kind of 12 years old sometimes too. Stupid shit like this still makes me laugh, just due to how absurd that it is. But yes, this was a pretty good example of the everyone is 12 phenomenon. In response, I posted, remember when the rightoids lost their fucking minds over Hillary, calling them basket of deplorables? They were never actually interested in any sort of common civility. It was always just a tool to bludgeon their opponents with. Which is correct, by the way. That's why they're fucking crybullies. The right has been doing this the entire time. Hell, think back to Rush Limbaugh earlier in the video, where he said he wanted Obama to fail, and then cried when Obama told the GOP to not listen to him. It's the same playbook every single fucking time. Anyway, Sargon hopped into the conversation and said who struck first, implying once again that the right's bad actions are justified by previous bad actions from the Democrats. But hopefully, as this video has laid out this entire time, you can see how that's just not true. Now that being said, the reply that I gave was ultimately wrong. I blamed Trump for the beginning of this tit-for-tat game, but now we know it ultimately goes back to Limbaugh. Nonetheless, it's still the right who's responsible. Anyway, I received this reply from a random guy. Did you forget about clinging to their guns and Bibles, Dev? I guess it might have been a little too subtle for you. But once again, this is just a post hoc justification. We've heard Obama's comments. They were not divisive. So I told this guy the truth. Obama wasn't sneering at rural America. He was accurately describing what middle America did after suffering from deindustrialization. Obama was completely correct, and getting offended at the truth makes you a triggered fucking snowflake. It truly is incredible how the same people who used to spout, "Facts don't care about your feelings, libtard," are now constantly getting offended by objective fucking reality. Also, I mentioned JD Vance in this exchange, because Vance said the exact same fucking thing back in 2016. When promoting his book, Hillbilly Elegy, Vance said, "What many don't understand is how truly desperate these places are." And we're not talking about small enclaves or a few towns. We're talking about multiple states where a significant chunk of the white working class struggles to get by. Heroin addiction is rampant. In my medium-sized Ohio county last year, deaths from drug addiction outnumbered deaths from natural causes. The average kid will live in multiple homes over the course of his life, experience a constant cycle of growing close to a stepdad, only to see him walk out in the family, know multiple drug users personally, maybe live in a foster home for a bit, watch friends and family get arrested, and on and on. And on top of that is the economic struggle, from the factories shuttering their doors to main streets with nothing but cash for gold stores and pawn shops. Vance is describing the exact same thing that Obama did. Maybe the rightoids just didn't like that a black man was saying it. These constitute pretty much all of the Obama-era events that radicalized the right, in Ben Shapiro's mind. And what a fucking pathetic list this is. In none of these was Obama wrong, or did he ever say something that was actually rude or dismissive or whatever. In fact, in each of these cases, it was the right wing twisting and amplifying the story that made people feel as if Obama was being divisive. Which brings us back to Megyn Kelly's list. We can quickly knock off those three interconnected points. Obama injected race? Really? Do you think Obama added the racial element to the Trayvon Martin story or something? Like nobody was talking about race till Obama came along? Obviously fucking not. Obama weighed in on legal cases before they played out, rather than remaining impartial? Oh, do you mean when he gave this disclaimer about his statements?
I'm the head of the executive branch, and the Attorney General reports to me, so I've got to be careful about my statements to make sure that we're not impairing any investigation that's taking place right now.
I've never in my fucking life heard Trump be anywhere remotely close to this reasonable with his rhetoric. Moreover, the idea that Obama violated the taboo of presidents not talking about high-profile cases until they concluded just isn't true. President Bush had no problem talking about the Enron case when it was still ongoing. He also spoke about the Scott Peterson controversy. That was a high-profile case in 2003 and hadn't yet been decided. When Bill Clinton was president, back in 1995, he gave public remarks on the ongoing O.J. Simpson trial while talking to Larry King. In fact, you can go all the way back through history and discover that pretty much every single president since the invention of TV has occasionally given their personal views in an ongoing trial that the nation is heavily invested in. And all of them, with the exception of Donald Trump, prefaced their comments by saying that these are their own personal opinions and do not reflect the actions or positions of government. The last point on Megyn Kelly's list, Obama twisting the knife in the racial issue. Like I said earlier, there's a lot of overlap there with point 2. And yet, it's also the one that I see the rightoids bandy around the most. In fact, while I was in the middle of making this video, a handful of people on Twitter gave me a bunch of examples of how Obama inflamed racial tensions. A lot of them are just repeats of what Ben Shapiro said, so we're not going to cover them again. I'll just include the new claims. This guy linked me 2 articles. The first is from the Heritage Foundation, published in 2017, titled, "Obama's Legacy is a Weaker and More Divided America." The first example in this article is the new Black Panther voter intimidation case. What happened here is that during the 2008 election, 4 members of the new Black Panther Party showed up to a polling station in berets and leather jackets, with the leader of the group, Minister King Samir Shabazz, carrying a billy club and hurling racial epithets at white voters. The incident was recorded on a flip phone camera at the time and went viral on YouTube. Shortly after, the Bush administration filed charges against all 4 men for voter intimidation. Here's how the right wing describes the following events. When Obama took office, he directed his DOJ to drop all charges against the 4 men, because Obama actually supports the Black Panthers, and he hates white people, and he weaponized the government against white people, and for the benefit of black people. But that's not actually what happened. After widespread claims of racial bias from the right, the Office of the Inspector General conducted a review of how the case was handled, and here's what their report found. The viral footage showed that of the 4 men present, only Shabazz himself acted in a hostile manner, wielding the club and yelling at the crowd. When the police showed up and told the men to leave, they did. The investigators couldn't actually find anybody who was intimidated into not voting by Shabazz's actions. In other words, they couldn't find a wronged party. As a result, the charges against the other 3 men were dropped, and Shabazz was slapped with an injunction preventing him from doing any activism within 100 feet of a polling station. The reason this was the extent of the punishment is because there just wasn't enough evidence of him actually doing anything else. By the way, I'm not coming to the defense of these guys. This should not have happened. These people are fucking disgusting. But if you only read headlines, if you only pay attention to what goes viral, this story sounds like Obama took the side of the Black Panthers. And that ignorance is what right-wing spin doctors require for their narratives to be successful. The new Black Panthers case was the only original example from that first article. So let's continue on to the second one that this guy linked. A 2018 article from USA Today, claiming that Obama sowed the division that led to Trump. Alright, what do we got this time? Well, multiple conservatives claim that Obama was a divisive one. Oh, here's Marco Rubio repeating the bitter clingers shit, no surprise there. Fox News host Janina Pirro, Governor Chris Christie, Fox News host Bill O'Reilly. Okay, this is a bunch of rightoids claiming that Obama is divisive, but where is the division? Where are the actual examples of Obama's divisive actions? Well, there's actually none in this article. Lots of claims of division, but no actual evidence of division. A second retard dropped his own examples in that Twitter thread. He opened with Trayvon Martin again, which we already covered, and then he called Obama a race hustler on the Tamir Rice shooting. Hey, that's at least a new example. Tamir Rice was a 12-year-old black kid playing with an airsoft gun at a park on November 2014. For those of you who don't know, airsoft guns aren't real guns. They're made to look pretty real, but they use air cartridges to fire BBs or paintballs. Surveillance footage showed that the officer who arrived shot Rice within seconds. He just hopped out of his car and blasted him. It later came out that the officer was deemed unfit for duty at his previous policing job, something that he left out of his resume when he applied for his current one. And then our Twitter friend brought up Ferguson and Michael Brown as the final example of Obama's racial divisiveness. Where the Tamir Rice shooting was pretty one-sided, all things considered, the Michael Brown shooting was not. Officer Wilson was called to the scene of a shoplifting in progress, where Michael Brown, an 18-year-old black man, along with his friend, a 22-year-old black man, were stealing cigars from a store and shoving workers around. When Wilson found the pair, they were walking down the middle of the road, blocking traffic. When Wilson stopped to talk to them, Michael Brown actually reached into the window of the police car and tried to grab Wilson's gun. A struggle ensued and Brown was shot in the hand. At this point, once again, there's conflicting reports from multiple witnesses. What we do know is that Michael Brown tried to run away, but stopped and turned around. The pro-Brown faction claim that Brown put up his hands and said, "Don't shoot," but Wilson shot him anyway. The pro-Wilson faction claim that Brown turned around to charge at Wilson. Either way, Brown was hit 6 times and died at the scene. After a 5-month investigation, prosecutors declined to charge Wilson with any crime. Obama gave an interview in December of 2014, talking about Tamir Rice, Michael Brown, and Eric Garner. Garner's death was the one that started Black Lives Matter. He was strangled by a cop during a confrontation. Garner was suspected of illegally selling cigarettes. When officers tried to arrest him for it, he got belligerent and was taken down to the ground. However, his asthma, obesity, and heart disease contributed to the encounter being significantly more deadly to him than at first glance. In any case, Obama's public comments on all three of these events come from this interview, and surely we'll find the divisive stuff here, right?
The country is concerned about, can we trust police? Are we safe with police? My first question for you is, in the midst of this and all that's going on, you didn't start this. This problem didn't begin under your watch. This is incredibly persistent and pervasive. But how much of it does your administration feel you're responsible for making an impact on?
Well, I think an enormous amount. Not just because, as president, you're always responsible for what happens in this country, and you got to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. But because of my particular experiences that I bring to this office. I had a group of young people come before we met, a wider group of civil rights leaders and law enforcement. Most of them were somewhere between 18 and 25. A couple of them were from Ferguson. And when they described their own personal experiences of having been stopped for no reason, or having generated suspicion because they were in a community that supposedly they didn't belong, my mind went back to what it was like for me when I was 17, 18, 20. And as I told them, not only do I hear the pain and frustration of being subjected to that kind of constant suspicion, but part of the reason I got into politics was to figure out how can I bridge some of those gaps in understanding so that the larger country understands this is not just a black problem or a brown problem, this is an American problem.
Again, feel free to go watch it for yourself, but nothing that Obama said on any of these cases was factually incorrect. Nothing was rude, nothing denigrated white people. Obama also gave a series of remarks solely on the Michael Brown shooting, minutes after the grand jury announced that charges would not be filed. These are, in my opinion, his most contentious remarks on matters of race. This is as bad as it gets. So, let's see how bad it is.
First and foremost, we are a nation built on the rule of law. And so we need to accept that this decision was the grand jury's to make. There are Americans who agree with it, and there are Americans who are deeply disappointed, even angry. It's an understandable reaction. But I join Michael's parents in asking anyone who protests this decision to do so peacefully. Let me repeat Michael's father's words. Hurting others or destroying property is not the answer. No matter what the grand jury decides, I do not want my son's death to be in vain. I want it to lead to incredible change, positive change, change that makes the St. Louis region better for everyone. Now, Michael Brown's parents have lost more than anyone. We should be honoring their wishes. I also appeal to the law enforcement officials in Ferguson and the region to show care and restraint in managing peaceful protests that may occur. Understand, our police officers put their lives on the line for us every single day. They've got a tough job to do to maintain public safety and hold accountable those who break the law. As they do their jobs in the coming days, they need to work with the community, not against the community, to distinguish the handful of people who may use the grand jury's decision as an excuse for violence, distinguish them from the vast majority who just want their voices heard around legitimate issues in terms of how communities and law enforcement interact. Finally, we need to recognize that the situation in Ferguson speaks to broader challenges that we still face as a nation. The fact is, in too many parts of this country, a deep distrust exists between law enforcement and communities of color.
Some of this is the result of the legacy of racial discrimination in this country. And this is tragic because nobody needs good policing more than poor communities with higher crime rates. The good news is we know there are things we can do to help. And I've instructed Attorney General Holder to work with cities across the country to help build better relations between communities and law enforcement. That means working with law enforcement officials to make sure their ranks are representative of the communities they serve. We know that makes a difference. It means working to train officials so that law enforcement conducts itself in a way that is fair to everybody. It means enlisting the community actively on what should be everybody's goal, and that is to prevent crime. And there are good people on all sides of this debate, as well as in both Republican and Democratic parties, that are interested not only in lifting up best practices, because we know that there are communities who've been able to deal with this in an effective way, but also who are interested in working with this administration and local and state officials to start tackling much needed criminal justice reform.
Okay, I'd like to point out that 2 prosecutors looked over the evidence of the case. The first one, Robert McCulloch, presented his evidence to the grand jury, who declined to indict Officer Wilson. He retired in 2019. The second one, Wesley Bell, who took McCulloch's place, went into the job specifically with the intent to charge Wilson with a crime. He spent 5 months poring over the case files, and then ultimately decided not to do so. The DOJ's report on the event concluded that all credible witnesses and physical evidence corroborate Wilson's version of events. With all of that in mind, maybe you could say that Obama's comments, empathizing with the parents of Michael Brown, who did lose their son, even if their son was an assaulter and a thief who attacked the police, went too far. You could make that argument if you were heartless, sure. And maybe you could say that, unlike with the Trayvon Martin case, this was not the time for Obama to bring up historic injustices, because all evidence pointed to Brown attacking Wilson. Okay, I'll give you that one, but the vast majority of Obama's comments here are completely reasonable. He's calling for protesters to be peaceful. He's putting a lot of stock in good cops, which he believes are the majority. He's fully understanding of the fact that black men disproportionately commit more crime. I do have complaint with some of the things he's said here, but these are minor nitpicks. Trump blows by this level of blunders every single day, within the first 10 seconds of him opening his fucking mouth. Also, while I was making this video, another one of those "Obama set back race relations 100 years" tweets went viral again. And again I asked the same question. Where is the racism, fellas? And you know what? They all said the same fucking bullshit. Trayvon Martin, Henry Louis Gates, bitter clingers. It's a never-ending avalanche of lies and misremembered quotes. It's all feels-based, no facts. Either the rightoids who claim that Obama radicalized them are just fucking lying, or they didn't actually hear what Obama had to say on these topics. They only heard what Fox News and other right-wing talking heads claimed that Obama said, and they got fucking psyoped. Whenever you confront these clowns about this shit on social media, they always stop fucking replying, because they know how ridiculous they all are. So, I think we can safely say that the whole Obama divided America with his racial hatred hypothesis can finally be put to bed. There's just no evidence of it. But the fact that so many people feel as if this is true does need to be explained. Is it actually the case that right-wing thought leaders have told the big lie for nearly 2 decades now, and it's been repeated so much that it's just believed to be true? Well, yes, that's absolutely what happened. But there's something else happening here too. Last year, I made a video titled "Can You Be Racist Against White People?" where I spent an hour and a half going over academic work, investigating the idea that racism is prejudice plus power. I want to revisit one of those papers we discussed back in that video, Racism Today, Continuity and Change in the Post-Civil Rights Era by Howard Winant. Now, Winant is what he calls an advocate for economic democracy, which is another way of saying a market socialist. In market socialism, money still exists, goods and services are still sold for profit, but all workers co-own their workplaces. There's no private investment. There's no owners who don't work. Winant also created the racial formation theory, which is notable for being the origin of the idea that race is a social construct. Across Winant's body of work, he commonly refers to liberal colorblindness in a negative manner. He views it as a Reaganite delusion meant to obscure racism in American society. In that paper, he wrote, "The neoconservative project deliberately restricted its attention to injury done to the individual as opposed to the group, and to the advocacy of a colorblind racial policy. Such an approach reduced race to ethnicity and almost entirely neglected the continuing organization of social inequality and oppression along racial lines." Worse yet, it tended to rationalize racial injustice as a supposedly natural outcome of group attributes in competition. The post-civil rights era has witnessed a significant racial reaction. It has rearticulated demands for equality and justice made by the Black movement and its allies in a conservative discourse of individualism, competition, and laissez-faire. We must recognize that it is this new right discourse which is hegemonic today, and that in these terms, racism is rendered invisible and marginalized. It is largely treated as an artifact of the past. It is common to find the view, especially among white people, but also among non-whites, that we must somehow get beyond race in order to overcome racism. For example, I often hear in my classes comments such as, "I don't care if someone is black, white, green, or purple. A person is just a person." This implies that racism is equivalent to color consciousness, and consequently, non-racism must be a lack of color consciousness. We should recognize that this idea, however naive, is a true product of the civil rights era, notably the movement's early liberal years. What Winant is saying here is that the right wing from the pre-civil rights era was just openly racist. However, the civil rights movement successfully made overt racism unpalatable to the average person. As a result, the neoconservatives, beginning with Reagan, held a different view of race than the old right. The neoconservative movement is more individual focused, and it therefore made sense that their view on race would ultimately be an individualistic one. Overt racism against individuals was no longer socially acceptable. The racism the neocon system allowed was not open discrimination, but rather neutrally worded policies that had a disparate impact on racial groups. I'll give you a hypothetical example. Let's say you have a country of two races, green people and purple people. Historically, purple people were racially marginalized by green people, but nowadays it's no longer acceptable to be racist. So a lot of old anti-purple policies and laws have been repealed. However, it turns out that for cultural reasons, purple people wear hats on Wednesdays, while green people don't. If the government passed a law making it illegal to wear hats on Wednesdays, that would be a systemically racist law. Not because it specifically names the purple race as the target, but because it targets a behavior that only one race engages in, with a punishment that is disproportionate to the action. No individual is being racially discriminated against, but the system itself, even if run neutrally, creates a racist outcome for no real reason. It's not like wearing a hat on Wednesdays hurts you or anything. In these passages, Winant is lamenting the turn of the youth towards liberal colorblindness. Well, the youth of his time. He was writing in the 80s and 90s. Because even if they meant well with their "I don't see race" attitudes, it also meant the actions of actual racists could be concealed by an appeal to liberal colorblindness. An actual racist could, in fact, gleefully implement a law banning people from wearing hats on Wednesdays, and then appeal to liberal colorblindness in his defense. He's just doing his job. The law applies to green people too, not just purple people. In this way, Winant argues, the naivete of the liberal allows racism, which was on the back foot after civil rights victories, a little bit of space to regroup. And you know what? Fair enough. That's a real critique. However, another effect happened at the same time, which Winant didn't understand. I assume it's because he's a boomer. My generation, the millennials, grew up subsumed in this liberal colorblind culture, including black people, or Asian people or women. It would still take gays a few more years. Even if it was simply a token effort, that was nonetheless considered mundane to us. Like, this is just how it is, who cares? The Reaganite neoconservative paradigm of treating all people as equals and disregarding race is just normal to us, and that is a real victory against racism. The racists of older generations, like the boomers and even further back, may have had a stranglehold on the culture of their time. They could be openly racist with no issue back then. And then when the culture shifted post-civil rights, those old racists had to hide their power level, which Winant was correctly worried about. However, what he didn't notice is that for those people younger than him, liberal colorblindness was not simply a tool used by his racist opponents. It was the new normal cultural state for the next wave of people coming up, my generation. And we genuinely believe in those values, and those values are the key to solving racism. The problem, ultimately, is that Winant was at least partially correct about the old racists subverting liberal colorblindness, something that we failed to guard against despite all of our successes. Let me show you what I mean. In 2019, an anonymous 4chaner posted this message, and it resonated with so many people it's still getting reposted constantly. The reason white racism is increasing is because this generation of young white men were raised to be the least racist generation of whites to ever exist on the history of the planet. We grew up being taught that racism was bad, that we were all going to move past it and work together towards a better future. Even here, in the most traditionally racist part of the country, nearly every young white boy in my generation grew up watching black athletes, black actors, listening to black musicians, etc. It was all normal. We were 95% post-racial. So as we got older, we stuck our hands out in friendship, like we'd been taught to, and then every non-white group on the planet came by and sucker punched us from behind, called us evil white devils, and told us we deserved to die. We were ready and willing to move on from the past. The rest of you weren't. Instead of shaking our hands and marching off together, you chose revenge against the only white people who ever let their guard down. So now yous can't be our friends, and we're reforging the identity we were taught to shed. Now, this story isn't quite true. To give the devil his due, there is certainly a chunk of anti-white hatred on the left. I've seen it myself in academic spaces, in some online spaces, so fair enough. But this victimhood narrative played well with a lot of people who believed, since 2008, that Obama was meant to be the great unifier, and instead he was using the government to empower black militias, and sending your tax dollars to black baby mamas, and raping white women or whatever the fuck. There is this sense on the right that millennial right-wingers are reluctantly right-wing, that they had genuinely believed in the post-racial utopia they had grown up with, but it was Obama that stole it from them. And now they're being forced to reconstruct a new white racial consciousness. And as always, the best possible shorthand for explaining these feelings can be found in ridiculous internet memes. There's a frankly really funny meme from 2009 called Give Her the D, or Give Her the Dick. What happened was, a user on Pornhub named Ross53545 posted the message "Give her the dick" under random porn videos. Oftentimes the philosopher Rene Descartes is paired with the phrase, because Ross's avatar on Pornhub was Descartes' face. Of course, people began posting this quote as if it were actually Descartes who said it. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because other Ross messages also made the rounds on 4chan back in the day. Like, for example, look how she opens that sweet ass wide for the dick. Bang it hard for Obama. Dick this fine bitch for the revolution. Take that black dick in your ass for Obama. Keep them in shape for good fucking and sucking. She is on her way to the White House. Obama is going to open up a lot of white asses for black dick. Get this ass ready for Obama and bring her to the White House. You get the point. When he's not talking about Obama and bringing girls to the White House, he's talking about eating shit. This dude was absolutely deranged. The point is, though, I genuinely do remember there being some racial anxiety among, I'll just be honest, racist white people when Obama took office in 2008. It's the same kind of feeling that those new Black Panther guys tried to take advantage of. The reason that the Descartes "give her the dick" thing included the Obama racial component in the meme is because in the edgy humor canon of 2009 was this idea that Obama was basically turning the American government into a black ghetto. He was having white women trafficked into the White House and all sorts of other ridiculous stuff. I probably won't be able to find it nowadays, but I do recall a Photoshop floating around where there were like lifted cars and naked women on the White House lawn, that sort of thing. It goes without saying, but obviously none of this ever actually happened. However, the jokes about it during the Obama years were simultaneously over-the-top ridiculous, to the point that no rational person could ever believe them, and yet also finely tuned to specifically prey upon the fears of white racists in an attempt to make them genuinely believe the most absurd shit. At the end of Obama's 8 years, the rank-and-file right-winger felt the same thing that Megyn Kelly described. This feeling that things were just not quite right in America, that the country felt off, it felt different, and it was Obama's fault. But it just wasn't. Now that we've looked over pretty much all of Obama's so-called divisive comments, there's nothing in there that was actually divisive or in any way abnormal, and his policies were, for the most part, pretty normal too. In much the same way that Dave Chappelle's comedy accurately described real anxiety that Black Americans felt towards white police officers, the various anti-Obama memes, like "Give Her the D," accurately described real anxiety that white Americans felt towards Obama's presidency. The difference between these two things is that the former example is pretty complicated. There is a real history of white cops abusing innocent black men, and there's also a real history of black men committing more crime per capita than any other race. Both of these facts means that policing actions in black communities take on multiple new dimensions, while the latter example is largely the result of subversive right-wing propaganda. America's overt racism might be vanquished, even though it is making a comeback, but sometimes dog whistling is actually more effective than being overt. It allows you to maintain plausible deniability, while letting the quiet momentum within the ideas do the job of propagating them in a more organic manner. Editing Dev cutting in here. While I was putting the finishing touches on this video, President Trump posted a video to his Truth Social page where Barack and Michelle Obama were depicted as monkeys. I guess America's overt racism really is making a comeback because holy shit. So I decided to investigate a little bit. The original video is some AI slop where a bunch of Democratic politicians and public figures are all various animals, with Trump as a lion, the king of the jungle. It was generated by the same guy who made the AI poop fighter pilot from earlier. And there's a whole bunch of rightoids online right now saying shit like, "If you're offended by this video, get off the internet." Of course, these same fucking losers cried like babies if you dared to dress up as Charlie Kirk for Halloween. The crybaby shit is so fucking tiring, man. Now, the video that Trump posted was actually a recording of a scroll through multiple videos, leading to people claiming that maybe Trump didn't know. Maybe he didn't even post it. You can't blame him. It's kind of funny how the response oscillated between, "It's just a joke, libtard, don't get triggered," and "Trump didn't know, please forgive him." In fact, after Caroline Leavitt stuck her neck out for Trump and called the video fake outrage, Trump turned around and blamed a staffer for it getting posted. Trump initially tried to shrug the controversy off, which he does with pretty much everything. Like here, he's just walking away from reporters asking him to comment. But eventually, he told the press that no, it wasn't his fault, it was a staffer.
media post that you took down earlier today, the White House says that a staffer sent it. Who sent it, and are you going to fire them?
I looked at it. No, I looked at it. I saw it, and I just looked at the first part. It was about voter fraud in someplace, Georgia. There was a lot of voter fraud, 2020 voter fraud, and I didn't see the whole thing. I guess during the end of it, there was some kind of a that people don't like. I wouldn't like it either, but I didn't see it. I looked at the first part, and it was really about voter fraud in and the machines, how crooked it is, how disgusting it is. Then I gave it to the people. Generally, they look at the whole thing, but I guess somebody didn't, and they posted, and we took it down, and we did it. You know, but that was a voter fraud that nobody talks about. They don't like to talk about that post. We took it down as soon as we found out about it.
Mr. President, a number of Republicans are calling on you to apologize for that post. Is that something you're going to do?
No, I didn't make a mistake. I mean, I look at a lot of thousands of things, and I looked at the beginning of it. It was fine. And they had that one post, and I guess it was a takeoff. By the way, a lot of people covered. If you look at where it came from, I guess it was a takeoff on The Lion King. And certainly it was a very strong post in terms of voter fraud. Nobody knew that was at the end. If they would have looked, they would have seen it.
Now, maybe you still think that people reacting negatively to the Obamas being portrayed as monkeys are taking it too hard. After all, surely they should be able to take a joke, right? Roll with the punches, you know? And I have some sympathy for that position, you know? Free speech, comedy, I get it. What kind of a person would take such ridiculous offense at being depicted as a monkey? Oh, it turns out that's actually Donald Trump.
New rule, Donald Trump must immediately submit to DNA test to determine... to determine whether he is, in fact, the love child of a human woman and an orangutan from the Brooklyn Zoo. Look, Donald, I'm not saying that your mother was repeatedly fucking an orangutan back in the 1940s. I don't know if that's true. I hope it's not true. But given your face, your physique, your intelligence level, and of course your hair, the American people deserve some real proof that your mother did not spend most nights in 1945 covering her body in banana oil, sneaking into the monkey cage, and compulsively humping an orange-haired ape.
Yeah, back in the day, Bill Maher made this funny and altogether innocent little joke on his show, and Trump responded by suing him for $5 million. It is incredible how we've got two recent presidents who have been made into a monkey meme, and the Republicans are scrambling all over themselves trying to defend the Obama one, while Trump was so triggered he filed suit over his. Do not take these fucking people seriously. Do not listen to their crocodile tears. They do not make appeals to your empathy for any reason other than convincing you to let your guard down. To them, words are simply a means of deceiving others. Anyway, let's return to scripted dev. The American right-wing media apparatus spent a decade screaming this is not normal with regards to any of Obama's actions, whether objectionable or not. They weren't directly racist, but they did play off of old culturally racist ideas that had been held over. They accused Obama of doing things he just wasn't doing. They twisted statements and repeated them until the fabrication became more real than the real thing. They did this over and over until rank-and-file people on the right actually began to believe this false reality. And we've been living with the consequences of all of this ever since. Personally, I think the best example to show exactly where this process has led us is the entire online cultural backlash surrounding the tragic murder of Irina Zarutska last summer. We talked about this a little bit in my recent anti-car activist video, but this time let's go over the story in slightly more detail. The 23-year-old Zarutska was a Ukrainian refugee to America, riding the subway on August 22, 2025, when she was stabbed and killed by DeCarlos Brown Jr., a 34-year-old black man. Brown had a criminal history. He had been arrested 14 times over the years. He was convicted of breaking and entering back in 2014, and while on probation for that crime, he was arrested for armed robbery and possession of a firearm. He was in prison for 5 years on those charges. He was eventually diagnosed with schizophrenia, which explained his lifelong erratic behavior. His mother sought involuntary confinement for him, but was denied. Eventually, after he refused to take his medication, his mother dropped him off at a homeless shelter as he was just too violent for her to handle. In January of 2025, he repeatedly called 911, asking for help about a man-made material inside of him that was controlling his body, for which he was charged with misuse of emergency services. Some conspiracy theorists believe that he was being controlled by brain chips or vaccines or something. But back over here in reality, it's clearly the case that this guy should not have been allowed in public. However, the American medical system doesn't actually have a solution for this problem. The left spent a long time advocating for abolishing asylums because they view them as restricting the civil liberties of the differently abled and neurodivergent, while the right spent a long time advocating for abolishing asylums in order to cut even more social spending. But that narrative isn't what went viral when the big right-wing aggregators got a hold of the story. In fact, this story was originally just a blip on the radar. It sounds callous to say, but it's true. Similar events, where people are slashed or stabbed on public transit, happen on a semi-regular basis across America. It's not good, it should be stopped, we should try to fix the problem, but it is reality. The United States is a country with 340 million people. You could have a new murder case every single day, and it would still literally be 1 in a million. In fact, a couple other similar stories happened around the same time as this one, and yet those ones didn't go viral. The Zarutska story, as obviously tragic as it is, was a local news story in Charlotte, North Carolina that came and went. There was really no reason for it to be a national event. It's not like the killer was missing, there was no manhunt. It's not like we didn't know why it happened, he was schizophrenic. It sucks that she died, it's really bad that it happened, but it was a murder, not a national tragedy. When libs of TikTok posted about the story for the first time, it was on September 6th. The killing was 2 weeks old at this point. The news had moved on. And yet, Chaya was angry that there was no national outrage over the event. She single-handedly brought the story back into the limelight. And maybe you think that she should have. That it was a real tragedy, no arguments there, and that it deserved to be seen by more people. Okay, fair enough. But what I see is the fact that libs of TikTok brought back this story, the one where a violent black man stabs an innocent white woman, and not the other stories that happened at the same time. Those ones didn't come back. They didn't get an extra lap around the right-wing griftosphere. Why is that? Well, after the story was exposed to the right-wing internet, the narrative surrounding the whole thing changed. It was no longer about schizophrenia and asylums. Now, DeCarlos Brown was cast as a bloodthirsty black race warrior who was masturbating to the idea of killing pretty white girls, and America was in the middle of a race war, and whites need to wake up and understand that we can't coexist, and all of this stuff plays into the meta-narrative of white people willing to give racism up and black people backstabbing them. The problem is that this narrative generally just isn't true. This event is not the wake-up call for whites to get armed and recognize that black people can never truly be their friends. It's the wake-up call for the mental health crisis in America that has been ignored for decades, that affects everyone, regardless of skin color. For as much of a real tragedy this story was, Chaya revived it and pointed the national spotlight on it, not out of the goodness of her heart, but because she found it useful for her political project, to parade around a pretty white corpse who was killed by a black man. This is why she never posts about any story that goes against the narrative she spent years crafting. And man, don't get me wrong here. There is obviously legitimate anti-white racism on the left, and that needs to fucking stop too. Just because I'm talking about the sins of the right today does not mean that I'm excusing the sins of the left, or that I'm somehow invalidating my previous videos where I critiqued them. No. Every single video I've made against the left, every single drop of criticism that I've spoken against the left, they are all still in full force. I take back exactly nothing of everything I've ever said. But I'm not going to play this game where we all pretend that left-wing culture war issues means the right is better, because they're fucking not. For the most part, all of the stories that fuel this narrative, that white people were ready for racism to be over, but were backstabbed by blacks, it's all cut from the same cloth as the Obama stuff. Lies, half-truths, exaggerations, twisted and amplified by right-wing media, they want you to be angry, scared, and radicalized. And they will manufacture stories to make it happen. This brings us all the way back to the start of the video. I briefly showed a tweet declaring that American racism was virtually gone by 1999. Let's actually check it out. By 1999, racism in America was virtually gone, thanks to these 4 men. No, you don't understand, it was gone, along with pictures of Bill Cosby, Michael Jordan, Will Smith, and Carl Winslow. But thanks to these 4, all of that's been erased. I don't know how it was pre-civil rights, but this is the worst it's felt in my lifetime. You don't understand if you were born after 1990. It wasn't supposed to be like this. This time with pictures of Obama, George Floyd, Carmelo Anthony, a black student who killed his classmate, and Ibram X. Kendi. The people who post these messages to 4chan and Twitter about how racism was once over, but it was black people who brought it back, are around the age that they would have grown up in the liberal colorblindness paradigm that Winant described. They aren't dog whistlers like the racists of Winant's day. They were true believers of that liberal colorblindness, and they feel as if their belief in that system has been betrayed. Some of these millennial true believers of liberal colorblindness have become racist over time, but they are lamenting that shift. They aren't the gleeful racists of yesteryear. They're sad about it. The reasons they've become racist over time are, quite frankly, not as strong as they think they are. In fact, a lot of it is a psyop. Look at that second set of 4 pictures again. George Floyd? He didn't do anything except get high on fentanyl, try to pass off counterfeit money, and then get choked up by the cops. The growing racial divide isn't his fault. Carmelo Anthony? I feel like this dude just needed a 4th picture, and he chose the most recent black youth violence scandal or something. Like, this would have been Trayvon Martin if he had made this post 10 years ago. Ibram X. Kendi? Now here's where things get interesting. Kendi is a racial activist, and he believes in some of the same things as Winnet. In his own way, he decries liberal colorblindness as simply being cover for actual racism. But more importantly, there is absolutely some anti-white racism in this guy's work. For example, he criticized Amy Coney Barrett for adopting black children by saying that white colonizers sometimes adopt black children and civilize them by making them white, which is fucking ridiculous. His career blew up after George Floyd, and his Center for Anti-Racist Research took in $55 million to create anti-racist scholarly work. 3 years later, very little work had been produced, and the operation fell under public scrutiny. When Kendi was asked about the situation, he said, "Not everyone wants to build an anti-racist society, and racist ideas about a corrupt black leader running a dysfunctional organization are so ingrained that reporters don't feel the need for evidence." Okay, that might be true, but that still didn't explain what the fuck you did with all the money. The center ultimately closed in 2025 after Boston University declined to renew the organization's charter. As for what it actually produced, well, they ran a COVID tracker broken down by race from April 2020 to March 2021. In 2022, they published 35 essays. Yeah, that's about it as far as I can tell. I'm pretty comfortable putting Kendi in the same bucket as people like Patrisse Cullors, activists and academics who became high-profile race grifters in 2020, raking in millions of dollars for basically nothing. People like these guys absolutely contribute to division and racial tension in the United States, which leaves us with Obama as the last of the 4 men that this person thinks destroyed the racial harmony of 1999. Hopefully, by this point in the video, it's very clear that this view of Obama as a racial divider is the result of right-wing propaganda. There was no divisive rhetoric, only true statements that right-wingers couldn't stand to hear coming from a black president. We're coming up on the end here, so let's loop back around to the beginning. After Rush Limbaugh lost his shit at Obama for telling the GOP don't listen to Rush Limbaugh, even though previously Limbaugh had said he wanted Obama to fail, Limbaugh gave a speech at a Republican event in February of 2009. In this speech, he didn't explicitly say the words Obama is divisive, but he planted the seeds for the idea.
President Obama is one of the most gifted politicians, one of the most gifted men that I have ever witnessed. He has extraordinary talents. He has communications skills that hardly anyone can surpass. No, seriously. No. I'm being very serious about this. It just breaks my heart that he does not use these extraordinary talents and gifts to motivate and inspire the American people to be the best they can be. He's doing just the opposite, and it's a shame. President Obama has the ability, to inspire excellence in people's pursuits. He has the ability to do all this, yet he seeks a path that punishes achievement, that punishes earners, that punishes, and he speaks negatively of the country. Ronald Reagan used to speak of a shining city on a hill. Barack Obama portrays America as a soup kitchen and some dark night in a corner of America that's very obscure. He constantly is telling the American people that bad times are ahead, worse times are ahead.
Limbaugh's characterization of Reagan's America as the shining city on the hill, the land of opportunity, versus Obama's America as a failing, fallen country, riddled with crime, where the majority of the people are serfs of the state, is a position you can only hold if you think that Obama's honest description of the real problems America faced and still faces is somehow the same thing as blaming all white people for those problems. For Limbaugh to admit that there is a third position between those two extremes, that America is a land of opportunity, but also that it has real problems that must be addressed, would basically be the kill shot for his entire worldview, which is why he spent his whole career sticking his head in the sand and believing that even looking upon the problem means that you are now doomed to live with it for all of eternity. In essence, Limbaugh, and frankly, the bulk of the American right at this point, have fundamentally misunderstood that Reaganite promise of racial colorblindness. These people believed that racism could be solved by never, ever acknowledging race. You must strip away all racial context from any event. In a hypothetical example where a white racist cop actually unjustly kills a black man for no reason, these people who were radicalized by Obama would be offended that race is brought into the conversation, even though the shooter has a racial motive. Because we're all supposed to be colorblind, guys. But that is allowing the racist to sneak in under the guise of liberal colorblindness, just like Winant warned. And of course, the solution to the problem is not Kendi and color-style race grifting either. The solution is not making everything about race and racism, even where it's obviously not appropriate to do so. That's the other end of the extreme. When you make everything about race and racism, even when it's not, you are actually the racist yourself. But also, if you ignore legitimate racism, because you simply say, oh, we're all human beings, I don't see race, therefore I don't see why this guy's acting racist, then you are actually allowing real racism to perpetuate. Once again, the golden mean between the two is the correct solution. Liberal colorblindness is the proper course of action during normal times. You should not treat people differently due to their race. But when somebody is actually being racist, refusing to view that racism as the evil it is, because colorblindness is comfortable and you want to maintain it, does not actually solve the problem. It makes it worse. This is why right-wingers can listen to this statement by Obama and claim that he somehow brought racism back.
There are a lot of people that in many cases don't think that you've been aggressive enough in talking about the numbers of African American men that are overwhelmingly shot versus white men. Are there ever times when the responsibilities and obligations of president get in the way of how you want to respond as a human?
Well, sometimes people's concerns are not based on fact, because if you look at after what happened with Michael Brown, if you looked at what happened after Trayvon, if you look at the decision after Eric Garner, I'm being pretty explicit about my concern and being pretty explicit about the fact that this is a systemic problem, that black folks and Latinos and others are not just making this up. I describe it in very personal terms. I think what sometimes people are frustrated by is me not simply saying, this is what the outcome should have been. And that I cannot do institutionally. It is my Justice Department that is investigating these cases. And part of the rule of law is that I'm not putting my thumb on the scale of justice. And it could compromise investigations if it appeared that I was trying to steer to a particular outcome. So I'm sure that there's some folks who just want me to say, in such and such a case, this is what I think should have happened, and if I had been on a grand jury, this is what I would have said, and so forth and so on. And I'll leave it to people to speculate on what I'm saying to myself or Michelle when we're alone at night. But what I can say is that this country is at its best when everybody is being treated fairly. We have a history and a legacy of people not being treated fairly in all kinds of walks of life. It is particularly important for people to feel like they're being treated fairly by law enforcement and police, because the consequences when they're not treated fairly can be deadly.
I know I sound like a broken record at this point, but there is nothing divisive in what Obama has had to say about race. He even goes to great lengths to outline what he cannot say, because as president, he has an obligation to maintain impartiality, and the right just ignores all of this because it completely destroys their narrative. The divisiveness that right-wingers claim Obama brought in was actually Obama simply saying, hey, there are still real racists out there. There's less of them, they have less power, and of course the black community is nowhere near perfect either. But real racists still exist, and when they do racist actions, you should not be permissive of those actions. That is what pissed everyone off. He didn't divide America, he didn't bring racism back. He just wasn't going along with the make-believe story of racism being completely and totally solved. And there's a fair number of rightoids out there who really don't like the idea that the moral system they claim to hold might actually oblige them to take some positive action once in a while, should the situation demand it. And as a result, they've been throwing a decade-long tantrum about it. That fire has been stoked by the right wing, through a steady drip feed of lies, half-truths, and history rewrites, leading them to believe that Obama was the real racist. Obama was the guy that ruined everything. Thanks, Obama! All of which justifies Trump, even though Trump is actually acting way, way worse than Obama ever fucking did. Having now watched all of that Rush Limbaugh, it's actually really obvious that he is, in retrospect, the proto-Trump. He talks the same way, he makes the same jokes, he has similar critiques of the Democrats, he fights the same straw men. But where Limbaugh was a political commentator, Trump is a politician. It is far worse for a country's politics that a politician behaves in the same bombastic and, dare I say, divisive way that political commentators act. That is the final gaslight from the right. Not only does the non-existent Obama divisiveness justify Trump's divisiveness, even if all the Obama divisiveness were true, Trump still just straight up blows it out of the water. What Trump and his crowd have actually done is far worse than what Obama or any other Democrat is accused of doing, whether or not those accusations are even true. The strongest case against the Democrats, their most divisive rhetoric, wasn't even from Obama. It was during the COVID era, when Biden said the anti-vaxxers were in for a long dark winter or whatever. Okay, yeah, that's pretty divisive. But it also ended up being completely true. Like 1 million Americans are dead from COVID, the majority of them per capita being unvaxxed. If you're willing to excuse Trump's divisiveness because you believe it's true, but still get triggered over Biden's comments even though they actually were true, then you are simply a hypocrite. And meanwhile, like I showed at the start of the video, Trump says unhinged shit every day, and that kind of rhetoric trickles down into the MAGA movement. Every day, he says something so rude, so ridiculous, that if it were any other politician, at minimum, they'd be begging for forgiveness. But not Trump. That's not Trump's style. In fact, his supporters like the crassness. Do you recall back during the 2024 election, there was a polling station that had a policy preventing the presentation of any candidate's slogans or symbols in the premises? And there was a woman who was wearing a Trump shirt, and she was told she had to take it off in order to enter? Kind of a ridiculous rule in my opinion. It's just a shirt. And frankly, you expect voters to be publicly supporting their candidates. But the woman, who was a bit older, responded to the poll workers telling her she violated the rules by exasperatedly ripping her top off, and voted that way, with her crusty old boobs exposed? And then J.D. Vance laughed about it on Twitter? If we were still in the pre-Trump era, we would consider this to frankly be pretty gross. Lower class behavior. Because it is. Nobody wants to see that shit, lady. This person would be a laughingstock for being, to put it politely, very tacky. But in the Trump era, the idea that people should behave in a decent way in public has basically vanished. At least on the right. And yes, there are some leftist weirdos at Pride events who also act tacky in public too. Everyone still talks about the trans tits out in the White House lawn during Pride Month. Well, guess what? Mainstream Democrats didn't support that. It's not like the official Biden account was pulling a J.D. Vance and saying, LOL, this is so funny, dude. The American right has completely abandoned any sense of decorum or decency. Right-wing leaders promote people who lack those virtues, and the tone is set on the right by Trump's own crassness, which is itself significantly more divisive than anything done by Obama or any Democrat. If you think that's funny, like LOL-based epic memes, bro, every time Trump dunks on somebody, but at the same time you cry about these imaginary fake dunks from Obama, you are not simply a clown, you are the entire fucking circus. It's actually really telling that MAGA's greatest defense for Trump ruining everything is that Obama did it first. Is that it? Do you have no positive defense for Trump's actions? Is it all just, the other guy did it, so we're allowed to do it too, even though we admit it's bad? Maybe the reason these guys lack morals is because once they realized holding a moral system did actually oblige them to action occasionally, they just found that shit to be too hard. Ah well, at least there's one thing that can truly unite everyone. Obama reading political theory to get into the pants of hot college art hoes.